Okay, and here we are, Friday night. Welcome back. Hope you had a good day today. Weekend coming up. We'll see what happens. On the phone for the first couple of minutes till we get our digital signal through fiber optics up and running. I've been trying for 10 minutes now, and it's not cooperating. I wonder if it's the heat. All right. First up tonight, another welcome conversation with a remarkable gentleman who is a scientist, extremely well-informed. He is Scott Perez, and he is standing by, well, hopefully sitting by comfortably, somewhere in the eastern part of the country. Hello, Scott. Welcome back.
Hey, how's it going, Jeff?
Crazy.
Everything's fine?
Yeah.
Good. I'm in Tampa, Florida.
Yeah, good. Mosquitoes, bugs, insects, any difference in the last year or two?
Oh, well, a lot of rain, a lot of mosquitoes.
Yeah. Okay.
In between that, scorching sun.
Oh,
it's been hot here as well.
Lovely place to live. How long have you been trapped there?
It's not bad. I mean, you get used to it. Your blood thins out, but I mean, I guess there are a lot of water sports, water parks, and fun events that you can do to keep cool.
You mean you're saying you don't engage in those things?
No, I do.
Oh, all right.
The beach, boating, jet skiing.
Yeah.
So all of that good stuff. Or the water parks here.
Okay, I've seen beautiful pictures of Florida. Never been there. Have lots of friends who live down there. And all things considered, I guess if you're a python or an anaconda, things are really good. No, they're doing well down there. Alligators, of course. How are the manatees doing, Scott? I like those animals.
Oh, they're fine. Those are fun. You can go and go by boat or jet ski, and basically go down to the local power plants where warm water is in the winter, and they're all hanging out there. Or you see them in the intercoastal or Crystal River is. I mean, we've gone diving over there before, and that's fun.
They come right up to you, do they?
You're not supposed to touch them. It's against the law to touch them.
Is that right?
They, I think, get spooked.
Oh.
I don't know. It's just a law that's in effect right now. I don't know all the details, but I know a lady got arrested for swimming with one and kind of petting on it a little while back. You can Google it and check it out.
They remind me of, I guess, a freshwater, lovable walrus kind of a thing.
Well, they're vegetarians.
Yeah.
So we've had them at the zoo, at Lowry Park Zoo. We had some there. And they feed them. They just throw them like 50 heads of lettuce.
50 heads of lettuce. Well, nothing wrong with being a vegetarian, although I don't know if I could contemplate 50 heads of lettuce. One salad is enough
that's kind of like, several of them in the tank, but our water is the warm water. You guys have the cool water over there in Malibu, so...
Well, we have the cool radioactive water out here in the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah.
So that's a cool hot water, so to speak. All right, Scott, what are we going to talk about tonight? I've got a list of items you want to touch on. We're going to start with element 115 and its historical record. What is element 115, and why should we care?
Well,
what's important about it?
I've kind of been looking at element 115 ever since, Frank Chile has been talking about propulsion systems, and Bob Lazar has been in the news again talking about element 115. And
yeah.
I figure I should look into this a little bit, related to maybe some history of the element, how it's formed, what we know about it, and that's kind of what I did here. I provided a nice, timeline of speaking points or milestones. I'm sure there's more information out there. I mean, the beauty of today is you can go out and get microfish at your fingertips, whereas, in the 70s and 80s you were sitting in libraries pulling up or looking at journal articles, or you really didn't have the search capacity that you have these days. So
no,
I went into it.
Yeah. Card catalogs, Scott. Card catalogs, remember?
Oh, yeah, I remember that. That was brutal.
Let your fingers do the walking. Uh-huh. So
looking back, I guess, recorded history around 1789, you have scientists looking at elements and trying to group them in some sort of table and make some sense of it. And that's when...
This is... Hold on. Excuse me. This is 1789? So in the late 1700s, science was really already trying to put together a periodic table. That's earlier than I would have guessed. Interesting.
Oh, yeah, that's a short time ago, considering when you consider how old the universe is. I mean, it's just like if it was yesterday. I mean, it's only a few generations from...
I get it. I'm just talking about the accomplishments of the so-called sentient species on this planet. That's pretty interesting. I wouldn't have put it there. I would have put it in the mid-1800s probably. But okay. So now you mentioned Lazar.
Well, that was the beginning of it. But I really the thing is the key here is these are humans that are putting these things together. This is the creator of the universe, and even though it was relatively speaking a short time ago in universal history, we were kind of arrogant because that's really kind of the starting point of what became the periodic table in 1868, Mendeleev. But still, what has happened until this day is people feel like, oh, well, these things are set in stone, and you watch lectures of people talking about it, and they're like, well, this is the way it is. There's nothing more than this.
See, that's orthodox physics. That's what you're talking about.
Yes, people who have been taught a certain way, that have certain beliefs, and they are not open to the fact that we have not. I mean, we really haven't traveled very far.
Hey, we don't know anything.
We can't really travel because we're going to talk about some things that are 40 light years away that we can look at spectrographically, but we can't even travel there.
And the question is, at 40 light years away, excuse me, are they still even there?
Yeah. Exactly. So, I mean, it's kind of funny when you look. I mean, at least I know some of these things have gone on here, but it's funny when you take a look at how the science is taught and perceived, and then you realize, okay, some things are not too far-fetched when it comes to material science and where it was and what it's evolved to. So then you can maybe accept what Bob Lazar and these other folks are saying when you understand that there's more there. And then there's kind of like an area of gray area where people they either don't want to talk about the work that they've done because it's classified, or they don't. It's just a gray area that they can't explain. So,
all right, you've mentioned Bob Lazar several times. Bob Lazar first came onto the scene, so to speak, quite a number of years ago. He's been around. His story was spread far and wide. I covered it extensively when it first came out. Very compelling, interesting material. I think what really adds a lot of heft to his pedigree is the man who essentially sponsored him into Lawrence Livermore. Tell us about that aspect of Bob Lazar. That's a big story.
Well, really, it starts before him, and he was the father of the hydrogen bomb, Teller, and I think that it was nice to help Bob Lazar out, given his background. But, that's the thing with science today. You really need mentors that take young adults or, people younger than them and foster their career into different areas. I think that's how younger people get more interested in science. And there's not enough of that.
Oh, no. I, in fact, would suggest there's very little of it left. People are just too egocentric. They're not involved with that. idea of nurturing younger people and giving them a chance to go through a door they otherwise wouldn't go anywhere near. Now, Lazar is the guy who originally blew the whistle on Area 51, and that's got to be 20 years ago or more. And
right, he was born in 1959. So we're gonna talk about a few things before his birth. I mean, the thing is, realize in 1961 there was an abduction of Barney and Betty Hill.
Yep.
And this comes into play. So Bob Lazar at that time is like, what, 11 years old?
Yeah.
Or 12 years old?
11, 12, yeah.
11, 12. Anyway, they are abducted, and Betty, under hypnosis, reveals a map that involves where these people took them in the craft. They gave, they revealed the map to them in the craft that they were from Zeta Reticuli. And so you're asking yourself, oh, well, this is interesting. Just a tidbit from history that went on that is you're going to see later is related to Element 115 and these propulsion systems. But what happened before Lazar came on the scene is kind of important. So you've got Walter Russell, who we talked about before, who had this transmutator that Westinghouse validated in 1927. So what happened early in history, there was a lot of information and work done on element formation as they were building these tables, and they were, trying to create this map. And that was ironic because it's related to a whole bunch of modern research we don't need to go into about atomic nuclei and element formation, but that's how the science kind of began. And then 1939, out at UC Berkeley in California, they build the first cyclotron by this guy, Ernest Orlando Lawrence. So now what they've done is they've gone from your traditional lab into a cyclotron, which is it's a instrument. It's a rather large instrument, and it's an electron accelerator. So it's got magnetic lenses where you can shoot electrons in a circle, and then off of those electrons you can do things like have collisions or shoot X-rays through materials, or in these accelerators sometimes you can do particle acceleration, and that's where the science...
You're primarily talking about CERN, and
right. CERN is a huge new modern European...
Yeah. However, did you know the announced plans for the new CERN? It's something like 50 times bigger. Yeah, it's huge. It's gigantic.
67 miles and
yes,
diameter or something like that. But you're going to laugh. You're going to laugh about CERN when we're done, because you're going to see that we can't really replicate some of the things that have gone on in the universe that we've now detected that are tied to this anti-gravity business, and you're gonna see how feeble CERN really is relative to man-made things, and not only this table, but
that begs the obvious question: why fund something like this when it obviously has severe limitations?
I think the initial interest in elemental formation, and that's where the heavy element interest came into, was science-based, pure science. But then later, the relationship to the atomic bomb is where you had a lot of funding going into these organizations. And there's another Livermore laboratory in Livermore, California, and that one is where Bob Lazar worked. And I think you had cutting-edge technology in those areas, and so he had exposure to that. So he's born 1959, and in 1969 they find a meteorite in Mexico, and this meteorite is subjected to analysis. So they start, looking at it, saying, "Oh, what came here from space, and what are the materials in it?" And they start to look at it, and then later on down the road comes out an article discussing that they found this ion. Well, what they predicted elements to be of a higher level, element 113, 114, 115. I think that was in the Chicago Tribune, but it came out some years later. 1975, I believe, is when they actually published the results. And so now we've got a newspaper record, at least. This isn't a journal article, but professors are quoted with these elements being heavy. That means that we've evolved quite a bit from the cyclotron methods of analysis of synthetically trying to create these compounds to some elemental analysis. And it's interesting that they involve xenon in this discussion. And that'll be kind of pertinent later.
Right.
But
right.
So there you already have.
Yeah. What I'd like to do, before we go any further, is help people who don't know who Bob Lazar is. Let me just give everyone a little bit of background on Bob.
Oh, okay.
It's a very interesting story. He doesn't have a PhD. He only attended a community college, Pierce Community College in the Valley in L.A. That was it. But a prodigy, I guess, nonetheless. It doesn't matter if you have degrees and letters behind your name, always. Bob Lazar, born, as you heard Scott say, 1959. He is primarily known for his claims of being hired in the late 1980s, and this story really came out in 1989, 30 years ago, to help reverse engineer purported extraterrestrial technology at a secret site called S4, located several kilometers south of Area 51. You know the story of Area 51. Lazar claims he examined an alien craft that ran on an antimatter reactor powered by the then unsynthesized element 115. So there's your 115. It was what he said propelled that craft. He also claims to have read U.S. government briefing documents that described alien involvement in human affairs over the past 10,000 years. Bob Lazar's claims resulted in bringing added public attention to the Area 51 U.S. Air Force facility. His story gained renewed attention due to a June 20th, 2019 on national radio, blah, 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 etc. So there's Bob Lazar. He's an enigmatic gentleman. He has been hugely criticized at various points, and yet his ability to produce just enough tantalizing information, like pay stubs and things, give him credibility, which keeps his story in play. I think that's a fair summation. Go ahead, Scott. I hope that helps anyway.
Sure, that's a great summary. Anyway, Bob, kind of points with the earlier stuff regarding Bob is that these programs, which are typically classified, are segregated, so people don't know other work that's going on. And before Bob was hired by Edward Teller to go work at S4, he worked at Lawrence Livermore, where he was doing basically elemental and nuclear physics work in this particular field.
Right.
And that's why...
go ahead.
That's why it's pertinent to say, look, he was already working on this elemental and nuclear physics formation stuff at Lawrence Livermore. And then this was an opportunity to go further in his career after he left there and started a business. And then he came back and he drove his car over and met Teller right before Edward Teller was giving a speech. I mean, this is a guy who's the father of the hydrogen bomb, but he became sponsored by Edward Teller into this program at S4, and
pretty heady stuff. Pretty amazing. It's really quite a story. I remember covering it 26 years ago on this program. Bob's still at it, and remember the story broke 30 years ago in 1989. Las Vegas journalist George Knapp was the man who really brought the story first to the attention of anyone who cared. Back in just a minute with Scott Perez. Hold on. I think we've got Bob Lazar established now as a springboard. Element 115 has been discussed. So where do we go next?
Well, Bob has said multiple times in multiple interviews since 1989 came out that he felt like the project was on the shelf and that it was brought off the shelf for him to do work on it. And then he's also commented about what he wonders has gone on with these projects since he left the program, given the advances in technology and material science.
Sure.
And so I think what you'll find is as Bob Lazar was growing up, as a kid, this science was also maturing. And so 1970 at this facility at UC Berkeley, they discover that they're colliding elements and forming elements of size that are much larger. And then Dr. Seaborg predicts that he can make elements in these cyclotrons, the accelerators, from atomic weight of 90, atomic number of 94 to 192. So now they start predicting, I theoretically can probably make these heavier elements, and it's going to take me a few years to get the technology up and coming and going.
Yeah. All right.
Which it matures. There's an article that came out in the Journal of Physical Chemistry in 1974 talking about these predictions related to what they called at the time ecobismuth element 115, and that one came from the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, which is in Tennessee, another facility where they make weapons-grade material, as well as the Savannah River plant. And you can see the writing on the wall. So when 1975 comes around and you've got some other analytical chemists that are looking at the meteorite from 1969, they're like, well, yeah, we see these xenon isotopes and traces of elements that appear to be heavy, 113, 114, 115, and this is a meteorite. It came from space.
Mm-hmm.
So the pieces of the puzzle are coming together, and hindsight is always 20/20. So then you have Bob Lazar working on his projects, and he says the same thing as Betty Hill. Zeta Reticuli is where the craft is sourced from. Element 115 is used from propulsion, and then we get a lot of discussions over Bob and supposedly other people familiar with this claiming that element 115 is in a nuclear reactor technology. Some people saying that protons are shot into the elements. This is a heavy element metallic, 115 is heavy metallic. So at this point, we're starting to believe in the fact that what we originally had down as a periodic table is kind of a small sample of what really exists. And then after Bob comes the Russian work that was done in conjunction with some Americans, and they learned that colliding the elements americium and calcium can cause the production of what they call moscovium, element 115, and 4 isotopes that are very short-lived. So now, after Bob, you have technology continuing to mature. And he talked about this. So, I think this was also on recent interviews as well. And now you start to look at nuclear chemistry as a whole.
Right.
And you ask yourself, okay, these are two known reactions between two elements on the table. americium and calcium. But what about the xenon gas, which is, forming ions in meteorites, and what involvement does that have? Does that have some sort of role? And are there other chemical reactions that we humanly don't understand because the facilities that we built and the time we've had to play with those facilities has been limited? So we don't have, it's kind of obviously that we don't have the technology to currently travel, that we know of, to currently travel light years away or build some of these exotic materials that we see on meteorites. It still perplexes us. We do have some space material. So later on comes what they call the nucleoside or nuclear table, which is a table that is huge with respect to what the periodic element table is for element formation. And the reason that this table is so large is because the atoms, or many of the materials in the formation of planets and stars and other things in the universe,
right,
cause nuclear material to be formed before it comes down to a stable state. So this big, huge chart can be represented three-dimensionally. Sometimes they call it the Valley of Stability. And Lazar talks about this. He talks about 115 in the Valley of Stability. And it's really a huge table when you look at it. And it gives you an idea that there's a lot more out there in terms of atomic and subatomic nuclear physics that we don't completely understand or probably can't even put down to build the table large enough.
Right.
And that's where you come to realization that, okay, we're still learning since Bob Lazar revealed this. Things are progressing, but one of the unusual things in the discussion I just mentioned was the supernovas, or planet formation. So you have collision of stars which create a supernova. And that's how a lot of these very extremely heavy exotic materials that are radioactive in the top right corner of the table are formed, and that's how they're formed. And we know this from material that we've acquired or spectral analysis that has given us insight into the element formation. And then, we, of course, are analyzing the meteorites and other things, but we also have perception and understanding of how the sun functions. And then we realize that these other events are very rare exotic events that occur in the universe. So we're sitting back with the sun looking at fusion between hydrogen and helium and those processes. And we're looking at something that has extensive temperature and massive gravity that is involved with those reactions and giving off heat. And you know that there's element formation that is part of the sun. So these other stars that are out there, there are even more exotic ones that produce other elements. And typically the stars, when either they sometimes expand themselves into what will happen to the sun in about 5 billion years. It'll become a red giant. And when it does, the Earth, will become part of, and so much for global warming, because the part of Earth, will become encapsulated in the reactor we call the nuclear sun. And it isn't going to matter at that point how warm the planet is, because it's going to be pretty much barbecued. So that's how heavy elements can be formed. When the sun becomes a giant and engulfs a planet, and now you have collisions with the material of the sun and the materials on Earth that we define on the periodic table, and these heavier elements start forming as a result of that collision. That's one example. Another is two stars colliding to create a supernova. And so of course, what happens in these events is you start to build evidence and discussion about how these elements are formed, and sure enough, we start to gather information, and we build better instruments. We build better detectors to try to go and gather the data. And
well, let me try and pull this together. For our listeners out there, what's important about all the things we've talked about so far? Where is this import, this big breakthrough that we're hoping to get to at some point, I would think, with Lazar, with element 115, with the whole S4 enigma, and the stupid Area 51 march that is supposed to happen. But where are we, and where are we going, and what do you expect the breakthrough to be? Now, in all fairness, as a journalist, I should point out that not everyone has a very high opinion of Bob Lazar and his story. It's just not a universally held concept. I just want to put that out there as a journalist, because it's relevant.
That's why I think it's important to wrap the science around it, because there are a lot of Bob Lazars. There are other guys and gals out there that have worked for the United States and contractors that are working on these programs, that have worked on these programs, and they're continuing to work on these programs. And I think what you're going to find down the road is some peculiar patents of the U.S. Navy recently were granted within the past year, and those are related to craft and technology for the craft that is related to xenon and possibly element 115. And I only say this because Lazar, and it's fair for him to say they probably put his project on the shelf after his security mishap. And then, maybe a few years later, as the science progressed, they pulled the project back off. And I think that's what we're seeing the results of now, what happened since that period of time. And what it involves is, first, now you have a lot of theoretic science, and you're collecting information from space, and then you've got people who start to look at a lot of data that's being collected in order to make projections of this nuclear table that's growing. It's a nucleoside table. And so scientists like Dr. Sam Gralla at the University of Arizona in 2017 are now saying, and this is a consensus in the field, and I feel this way as well, we learned a lot about the electromagnetic wave spectrum. We learned a lot about it. We've got microwaves, radio waves, we use infrared heating, visible, obviously. Ultraviolet has its place, X-ray, we use it in health, gamma rays, and that technology we've mastered with solid-state electronics and communications and computing, and we have all these examples of applicable technology. But the consensus in the field really since then is, and this goes to other folks who have, now said that the center of the atom, hydrogen atom, proton, is like a mini black hole, which is well published and, discussed, is the gravitational wave spectrum. That's the spectrum that we have not mastered, and as part of these systems, gravity is a major component. So we look at that chart today, and we see things on there that range on the left side from the Big Bang to supermassive black holes, white holes, neutron stars, and supernovas. And this is related to gravity and propulsion. So when we think of the sun, how large it is compared to the Earth, it is massive. So gravity plays a major role in the acceleration of the molecules as well as temperature for the collisions or the interactions that they have, and sometimes they have close interactions which result in quantum tunneling and rearrangement changes. So huge masses, and instead of an accelerator like the one we built on the planet Earth, the accelerator is gravity of a giant mass. And so it's almost funny that we think we can replicate universal technology of that mass in some little teeny tiny accelerator trying to do it on a nano scale.
It is honestly pathetic when you think about the enormous
It absolutely is. And we've talked about some of the wonders of the universe. Okay, we've talked about proteins, human body proteins, with the probabilities of formation at like 10 to the 500th power. Just ridiculously absurd things based on physics. Right. So we know that we're not going to replicate this universal process anytime soon. At that mass, we're playing around with things at these nanoscales. We're learning some things, but we are only limited by our capability. And so, technology is advancing, and we're playing more and more with the accelerators and building larger ones. But we're also, at the same time, building better telescopes, sending more probes out, gathering more data from these universal phenomena, which is part of this. And I think when we do master the gravitational wave spectrum, you will see exploitation of it first by militaries, which we've had
always
a lot
the way
of observations.
It is. Always. Once in a while, things trickle down to the consuming base of our culture. And it takes time. Otherwise, it's all black, it's all kept and wrung out like a kitchen sponge to make sure every potential for military application has been thoroughly explored, disclosed, and developed. Agreed.
Yes. And eventually, what happens is the technology that you have at your fingertips when you work in one of these facilities. So I've done research in a number of different facilities. You have multi-million-dollar instruments, and then, depending on how big it is, you have a CERN accelerator, and millions and millions of dollars have been pumped into there. To work in these environments you're a rare individual if you're a scientist working in these environments, and a lot of the stuff is kept quiet, but the technology eventually trickles out of there and comes into things like, cell phones and computers and guided missiles and all the different components of technology. So we expect it to come out in a commercial, private sector where people are using it for not only, transport across the earth, other things but that are related.
Remember, we're last in line for that kind of application. Mm-hmm. All this new technology is all military, all the time, until and unless they decide to let it out.
Right. But we are evolving. So the one thing about the evolution I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we have at our fingertips that Bob didn't even have. In the 80s, I know I was a computer nut. We didn't have any search engines to go pull historical information, or we really didn't have the ability to communicate in real time, with videos and data like we do now. So we have a lot of people that believe in science enough to publish their lectures. I've watched many lectures, or publish their work, or discuss it, or even journal articles and things like that are much easier. And that was really the premises. CERN, ironically, I worked with Vince Cerf. He was a colleague of mine. He spent time there. He's one of the fathers of the Internet. The purpose of the World Wide Web and the Internet was for scientific communication. And then it came to everything else that we tweet about or email about and all the fun little things. But that has helped the common scientists get information that they could not have gotten back, certainly when Bob was working on this. So he got the information from classified debriefings, published documents. And you can see that we are evolving, and that it's a good time to talk about these things. given current events, especially the Nimitz videos, and everyone talking
about. Well, this
about...
now you're kind of stepping into the idea of disclosure, and my argument is very simple. Disclosure is done. The cover-up is over. When the Pentagon announces and the Department of the Navy announces, as they have, that there are UFOs, they don't know what they are. They're sometimes all over the place. They see them by the hundreds. It's over. And what have the people done? Yawned, if they've even noticed, which I've been saying for years. Think about it. They've been conditioned since the 1950s and before with science fiction stories about life from elsewhere. So they're well ready for it all. I mean, this whole cover-up thing is really, to me, an obscenity. But it's over. It is formally over now. No more cover-up. The admissions are clear. The statements of fact are inarguable. The Navy and the Pentagon have said unequivocally there are extraterrestrial, unidentified flying objects on planet Earth. Period. And
they published the video. I mean, that was, I think, a smart thing because of what's going to come next, and some of the things we're going to talk about are patents and now. Where did those come from? And even more so when you're going to go publish a patent and try to get one, if the information's been known for more than 1 year, that invalidates the patent. So I don't even know how they got them. Because we've been watching, Lazar was 89, and we've been watching these things flying around for years. So the government has an unusual way of getting what they want and protecting it. So I think that answers part of that question there. But all of the technology is evolving, and these folks are like over in Caltech and MIT. They produce this project called the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory. It's a facility. Okay. And lo and behold, after several years, on August 17, 2017, they get these gravitational waves. They measure. And they're like, well, they're crunching the data and looking at where this comes from. And it's two stars in the area of Zeta Reticuli that collided and formed a supernova and created this gravitational wave that we detected for the first time. And it's such huge masses in the universe that you don't want to be near this thing when it blows up. I mean, we're talking about asteroids and meteors shooting out of it and traveling through space for years. And, well, we know what happened in 1969. They had the meteor. Where did that come from? What kind of event did it come from? And so the pieces of the puzzle are starting to come together for scientists, and that was really an amazing thing because the data was collected on August 17, 2017, but they didn't start talking about it until really October 16th. They brought it out and said, hey, we've seen these waves, and then January 25th, 2018, they start talking about supernova production of these heavy elements and their relationship to the gravity wave. And this event, 40 light years away, but these two stars, and ironically, Zeta Reticuli.
Right. Interesting. All right.